We're calling the work session to order, and the first items is to review our budgets. 14B Court was here. They left just for a few minutes. They'll be back, so we'll start with 266, which is law enforcement budget. We distributed a new worksheet. I wrote on there 266. We distributed a new worksheet and update narrative. We do have the final numbers from the proposed. It's going to the Washington County Board of Commissioners tomorrow on the PSU contract, and it's going to be substantial over the next 5 years, 15.2% increase. So we have the numbers, we adjusted numbers, and Giovanna, we can get started if that's okay.
Yeah, Giovanna Neal, Accounting Director.
Wait, John Newman isn't here. So I just want to, I think he's coming though. Okay.
All right, and so we did pass out a new updated draft for the law enforcement, like Supervisor Stumbo had said. We did get some numbers. I think those are going to be set for the Sheriff's Department, for the PSUs. And as far as, we've got all the narratives in here. I don't know if we have any questions. I do want to say that as far as the revenues, we did make one change in the revenues, and we increased the inspection fee for single-family rentals. We had that at $10,000, and just looking historically, I mean, we did kind of slow things down during the pandemic, but we've started wrapping things up again and picking them up. And so we did change that number from $10,000 to $105,000. So
and I'm sorry, Joe, I had it keyed in wrong. That's for the multiple units.
It really should be for the single family. The multiple can also be at 100,000, but the one that we're looking at, because I have the historical data, and that should be.
We did 90% of the single family this year. And we're at 125,000 revenue this year. I do know multiple is when we just started in the month of October. So we can go back and double check the numbers.
So looking at, because I did not give you the historical data, so you did not have that. So I do apologize. But for historical data, for the multifamily, or single family, sorry, for the single family, we started in 2015. I've got 141,000. In 2016, 108,000. In 17, 138,000. In 18, 104,000. In 19, 107,000. And then the pandemic hit, and that was at 48,570 for 20, and in 21, that was at 330,000. So it went down during those pandemic. So I'm looking, and right now we're at 130,000. So I'm thinking that we'll have around 100,000 for that. So I mean, if you want to change that, that's fine. We can push that down into the multifamily rentals, because that was we didn't do any inside inspections for the multifamily in 20 or 21, just outside perimeter, so we weren't charging very much. So that one was way down.
So those two numbers have to be adjusted according to the historical data. And we looked at multiple family, because I know we just started that in October. But we will do the single family and have to adjust that for the final budget if that's okay with the board. It's just based on the numbers we've done and the number of households we've done. I think hopefully there's less rental properties as well. Single family rentals. I mean, we can compare that to 2015. I know those numbers have changed a little bit.
Okay.
So those two numbers.
We can adjust those.
If that's all right with the board, just to go by it's hard to estimate. We know how many we've done on single family. We know what we have to do on single family. We've done exterior on multiple, but, and you don't collect till after the inspection.
Correct.
So we'll get if it's okay with the board, then we'll fine tune those numbers for.
Revenue?
Thank you, Joe, for the single family historical data.
Okay, so that was the only major change that we made, to this draft that we're presenting tonight. As far as the departments, so the departments we have for law enforcement, we have the Sheriff's Service Department. That's where our contracts are for paying out the sheriff. We do have one salaried custodial budgeted there. We used to have the director and a percentage of the executive coordinator salary in there. That was that first line item for salary. We have actually taken that out since the executive coordinator does no longer do any administrative work, and we did not replace a director in the sheriff's department. Is that correct? So we did change that number. It was at $14,935, and we changed that to a 0 because they're not doing any administrative work in there. Everything is being handled by Supervisor Stumbo at the moment. There is a request to do maybe a contractual person to help with the go-between between the sheriff and the township. So that is in there. That was in there originally as well. So that wasn't changed. It's just in there. Supervisor Stumbo, is there any other items you want to go over?
As far as the financial part, we can track that and monitor that. Basically, we're charged a certain amount for 35 deputies. In 2018, we authorized 38 deputies, but they have never been able to fill those positions. And this is historical, not only our sheriff, but other sheriffs as well. So in 2022, when I took over as the administrator of the budget, there was no ability to ever get to 38. So we budgeted for 35. We've been charged for 35 per the contract with the sheriff, and instead of charged for the 38 because we never had 38. So this budget shows the charge for 35 of the, they're called public service units, for people. It's not just a deputy, it has a lot of numbers in it. And the increase that's being proposed at the, by the sheriff it's going to be substantial by 2026. So we're going to contract for 2023 through 2026, and it's almost $1 million increase in cost. And the same time period previously, it was 419,000 increase. So it's just we just got the numbers, and remember I told you guys we were waiting for that. So it's a good thing that we have enough for 38 deputies too in order to absorb some of these costs. And my understanding, this is a whole new way of doing it. You have to ask for a grant from the county for the, John, is that your understanding for the police services millage, which that's new because that's been approved since 2018, and now we have to apply for a grant.
Yeah, from my understanding of it, it's the public safety and mental health millage that we have to now apply for. It's more, I took it as more automatic and a formality, but previously the public health and safety millage funded the county, which in turn funded the sheriff. Now, the county is not providing that money, so they're putting it on the departments, the townships, to apply separately to the public safety and health millage for that extra money. And I think for the first year it was 1.3 million 3.21 million.
Yeah, it's-
So what that does is, in effect, put the burden on the townships and not the county.
And it's not only Ypsilanti Township. I mean,
Correct.
did you get any answers to how many contract deputies there are?
I did.
And what?
Let me just find the email real quick.
It's not only Ypsi Township, there's several other townships that contract for police services that this is going to affect.
Yeah, the amount is based on 81 PSUs. I don't know. I think that's countywide, that where they got their numbers from, or 81 PSUs, police service units.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
did the sheriff's office ever give clarification on why they were increasing the rates of these PSUs?
I mean, we've had rates, pretty consistent during
Yeah.
21 and 22. I think it was 0%, and it's always been less, and because it's, a higher percentage, of course, it affects us more. The memo stated that it was because healthcare went up 50%, which didn't happen here, so I don't understand that enough. If we could get more into the actual numbers, that would help us, tremendously, but we don't have it.
So for the rest of the board there, I asked the question earlier today of the sheriff's office. How many contract deputies do you have for municipalities that rely on their services? And the number I got back was 76 countywide. Of that 76, we handle or contract 35 of them, which is 46% of their contracted road patrol. So I also have a request to try and get the worksheets, work papers that they use to put together their numbers so we can understand exactly how they're coming up with these numbers, where the money's coming from, where it goes to. So we'll see if that comes anytime soon.
And the county has always paid the difference between the cost and the actual cost and the amount they charged all the contracting communities. Based on this new approach, I'm concerned that they're not funding any of the Washtenaw County Police Services contracts. It's by a grant, but we haven't done grants. Even though it was approved in 2018, we've never done grants before. And the money that they used to do the 911 dispatch was $6 million. My understanding is that coming out of the police services, was my understanding.
Yeah, not sure where that's coming from, but it was mentioned that it's kind of the county's way of defunding to a certain extent.
Did they use those words?
No. No. Don't quote me on that. I was just,
I think not funding is a good way to
yes,
say it.
not funding, yes.
Well, I appreciate the work that's been done on behalf of the township to get questions answered, but I feel like if the county is moving to a different way of funding, it seems reasonable for them to come and do a presentation about what's happening there so that we're not answering questions on behalf of decisions that we didn't make and kind of secondhand. I know that they've come several times and they've explained, like they changed the way they funded some of the organizations and moved to a different way of doing it with some of the, which isn't just the county's portion with some of the services that they provided. They shifted to a different way of doing it. So I'm uncomfortable, like, not knowing what changes they're making because it's hard for us to make decisions based on not understanding the changes they're making. So I think in fairness, if they're going to shift the way they're going to do things, they need to be really clear about that. And they actually need to give us enough time to be able to make decisions, because if they limit the amount of time in clarifying what's going to happen with us, then that puts us in a really hard position to make really strong decisions on the for the betterment of Ypsilanti Township. So they get to lead in the way they are going to lead. They get to make decisions that fall under their realm. But if it impacts anything that's below it, then in fairness, they need to let us know what they're going to do so that we can make decisions. So I appreciate what we're doing, but we didn't make the decisions to do that. We're just going to be impacted by it, and so we need to understand what they're going to do. I know that when in planning for budgeting, you asked for what the increase was going to be, and there was a real delay in even getting a response on what the contract increase was going to be. That shouldn't happen, right? Like, if you're going to shift or you're going to change how you're going to do things, and you have to come to people and be transparent and say, we're thinking about this in a different way, and this is how it's going to impact you. That's just the fair thing to do, the reasonable thing to do when government, in order for government to work for the citizens, governmental leaders have to work together. They don't have to like each other, but they do have to work together. And so to be in a position where changes are being made and for us not to have full disclosure and transparency hurts everybody at a time when there's enough financial stress on everybody, whether it's governments trying to do what they're going to do or whether it's people trying to make their own budgetary decisions. And so when we're trying to balance budgets and we have to do things, then it all trickles down in a way that's not helpful for people. This kind of trickle down actually works and trickles down to people and causes strife. So I'm really disappointed to hear that changes are being made, and they may be for the right reason and with the right or with positive intent, but we're not going to know that if people don't tell us. So I would like to ask for someone to come do a presentation to help us understand or to provide us with written information about what's going on here so that we can do our due diligence as a board to take care of the residents in Ypsilanti Township that are relying on us to do that.
And they did have a Zoom meeting in October. But I like numbers and diving, and I asked John to, with permission from the county, to assist with diving into the numbers, and we're not there yet.
And to piggyback on Trustee Swanson's point, the information that was given was so voluminous, and it put the onus on us to try and find where the numbers came from, and that shouldn't be, because it's not up to us to find the numbers. It's up to them to explain where the numbers come from in that information, to direct us to this folder or this document, as opposed to just looking at a whole bunch of information that's very confusing and did not explain anything. You know, it was more so just giving you a lot of information and expecting you to look for it. And again, to piggyback on Trustee Swanson's point, it's not clear where the numbers come from and where where things are to be followed. So that was disconcerting.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Trustee Swan.
if I got this right, you said that 76 countywide,
Contract.
okay, and then we handle 35%, is that correct? 35 services? Okay. Okay, and then the other ones are the other areas?
Superior, York,
Okay.
out west.
Right, so that was divided in there. But what percentage had they given before? Do you know?
Yeah.
Washtenaw County? And what they're reneging on?
In 2011, we had 4%, 2012, 0, 2013, 1, 2014, 1, 2015, 1, 2016, 1%, 2017, 1%, 2018, 1.5, 2019 and 20, it was 0, 0, 2021 was 1.5, 2022 was 1.5, and then 2023 is proposed at 3%, 2024 is 4%, 2025 is 4.25%, 2026 is 4.25. So it's a total overall increase of 15 15.5% increase for the proposed
15.5.
police service costs and contract. So it just, they're much larger than I anticipated, but I understand things, went up, like Jimmy asked. They said 54% increase in healthcare, 25% increase in fuel. But my biggest concern is they want to go to what's called, we have to request grants. That's a structural change, not only for Ypsilanti Township, but for every contracting community. And it's tied to a millage, and if a millage doesn't pass, then what happens? I mean, that's like what those are the conversations that need to happen.
Madam Chair, and excuse me for my ignorance on this, I guess, I'm newer to the full-time role, but can you add, I just am concerned and confused about, we have a millage that is levied upon our taxpayers and specific language that was written in that proposal and that is levied on our property taxes. And so for us to have to apply for a grant to receive that levied money back doesn't
That's what's
seem
alarming.
like, I don't know that that's allowed, but maybe their legal counsels reviewed it.
That millage and then the people who have their own police department, they receive so much money to each community that has their own police department. But anyone that contracts with the county, we did not get one dime from that 34 or 35% of that millage. So it was one mill, 35% went to mental health, 35% went to the Sheriff's Department, public safety, and to work with mental health as well, and like in the language, and the rest of it went to the other contract agencies, who don't contract. So so they receive money from the millage, and I don't understand why they want us to apply for a grant. That's the part that's just, we can dig into the numbers and get the costs, but applying for a grant is just, that's the change that threw me off completely. And that is not funding the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department. To me, that's what it's doing when you have to do that.
Yeah, it's savings for the county. However, it's putting more stress on the townships and cities. And I think one of the ramifications of that, applying for the millage, is like you said, the failure of the millage to go through, which puts even more stress on your townships and cities, because that has to be funded by the general fund or however other means. And the information just begs more questions than answers, which we haven't received yet.
So again, I want to request that we ask for some kind of a presentation that explains this to us, because even asking questions at this point without knowing the structural changes that are taking place makes it hard for us. Like it'd be same as we're hunting through numbers. So it just doesn't seem like a strong way to go. The 2018 millage lasts for how long? When's that up? Yeah, I don't know. So I'm wondering, is this a structural change that's taking place while that millage is in place? Is it a structural change that's taking place to anticipate the millage? I don't even want to speak because it's not my place to it, but I thought there was also some issues with what they said they were going to use the money for and whether they could or not. I don't know, so I don't want to misspeak to say that. But we said we were going to agree to a millage, and then you're right, some communities had funds come back to them because they had their own police departments. But we didn't have any come back to us because we contract with them. It doesn't make sense. That's not making sense to me. So I'm wondering when the millage ends. And then again, I would just ask that I really don't want to hear the secondhand. I want to hear what's happening here firsthand, and preferably in a forum where residents could come and listen to this change too. I think they have a right to know.
Madam Chair, I will just add that I just quickly wanted to make sure that I was accurate before sharing this, but the resolution adopting the police services from 2022 to 2023 cost price metrics is on the County Commissioner Board meeting for tomorrow. So hopefully they have more information than we do.
And it requires you to apply for a grant. That's the part that I can't wrap my arms around.
It's hard for me to wrap around my head around the idea that another board is going to think about action without communicating with the impacted individuals. So we may or may not agree with it, but we would hear it and know it and then have an opportunity to, I would think, try and work some things out before it causes any kind of strife in the community. And I personally am frustrated with how frequently that happens. I know that Supervisor Stumbo has gone to the county and asked them, please don't, not please, that's not the right word, speak and interact with us, because we're all supposed to be working towards the same goal, taking care of same people. They have a responsibility for a larger number of people. But to not communicate with us is not strong governance, and it's not okay. And it causes unnecessary strife when people start to worry about things that they shouldn't have to worry about if their elected officials are working together. This is not okay. And so I guess does that leave us where we have to go and then say, we'd like to know what you're doing so that we can understand it? Like if they take action without even, like that just seems so top-down heavy, without clarity that's necessary. I mean, it may be that whatever they're trying to do, whatever decisions they're making, has some sense, and if we were told how that's going to work, maybe. But to not be told is not okay, because we represent you, they represent you. We have a responsibility to work together. That's just the way government's supposed to work for people. And this seems like unnecessary crisis.
I'll try to share the concerns with the commissioners, just of the grant, because that changes everything. And I understand price increases. I do understand that. But I also understand that we have to dive deep into the numbers, and we have to have the backup data that how did you arrive at that number. But to do it via grant, that's my concern. It's just my biggest concern right now.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to share, and I can email this out to everyone. On the Washington County clerk's website, they keep all, proposed ballot languages on there indefinitely, pretty much. And it was November 7th, 2017, and the levy was to go through December 1st of 2018 through 2025. And I guess just to add to that, in order for this to continue, some body has to place it back on the ballot, and I don't know if that discussion has happened. Is that something the county commissioners are talking about already or discussing? Because, if it ends in 2025, they're just going to be needing to talk about it sooner rather than later, so.
So probably the last collection year is 2025?
Yeah. And it was to, it's for 1 mil, and it was to levy $15,433,608. And it lists out exactly how to be used. 38% shall be allocated to Washtenaw County's Community Mental Health Department for mental health crisis stabilization and prevention. And 38% shall be allocated to the Washington County Sheriff's Office to ensure continued operations. and 24% shall be allocated to jurisdictions in the county which maintain their own police department. And that's Ann Arbor, Chelsea, Milan, Saline, the city of Ypsilanti, Pittsfield, and Northfield Township, excuse me.
Yeah, that's how. I just don't know why we're applying for a grant. That's our money.
Okay, so moving along with the budget presentation.
So sorry, Joe.
Oh.
I mean,
That's okay, it's very important, it is, so I agree with all that you've said, so I think that would be good to have some clarification, and see where they're allocating all these funds from and how they split them up. I think that's very good, and applying for the grant is very serious. But is there any more questions on any of the expenses as far as the sheriff services are concerned? There really wasn't any major changes except for the sheriff contract to that department. So the next department that we have is a new department this year. We used to have this department split out years ago, way before I was here. And basically what we're calling it is a community engagement department. And what that consists of in our budget is a full-time community resource specialist, that's the pilot program, and one full-time community engagement specialist that's vacant at the moment, and then one part-time community engagement specialist. And their jobs would be, the employees for that job would be to coordinate community resources, cover and administer neighborhood watch, special events, that type of thing, to get information out to our residents and our community. I did have to increase this because I did miss putting the new pilot person in here, so the fringes and the salary for 2023, I had to increase that by $55,000. So you can see those. Is there any questions on the changes I made? That was basically the wage and then some fringes for that other position that I didn't put in for the new pilot program person.
I just would say the new pilot position is working out wonderfully.
Yeah,
To have a community resource person that we can refer people to help connect them with the services. It's already been invaluable in the short time that she's been here. And there'll be a report on her activities and stuff. And that is a pilot.
I was just going to ask if there will be assistance to the person working those in the foreseeable future, like this year, if they'll have some help, assistance.
Yeah, well, we'd like to get that vacant position. That's a full-time position, the community engagement specialist. We do have one part-time person that does the neighborhood watches for us right now, but that's a big tax load for one person to cover all of those. So, we are trying to get that vacant position open. Hopefully it'll be in 2020, hopefully.
Okay.
And Lori has reached out to EMU for internships through their social work program.
Funding will come from that part-time position as well as other sources, if needed, to fund those positions, those part-time positions or intern positions. That's what I was asking. So I'm assuming that it will come from that.
So I don't have anything budgeted for any interns at the moment. I would have to bring a budget amendment back, and that would actually come from our revenue, from our special tax assessment for law enforcement. That would fall under that. But I would have to bring that back if we did get interns.
Paid intern.
If they were paid. Sometimes you have to do some special projects for school to get credit, and you don't have to pay those. I actually had to do a couple of those non-pay jobs.
Right.
So
That's what she said, too.
It depends. So if we do have to pay for one, then I would bring that back to the board for approval to even hire an intern. So
Thanks.
all that would be brought back. Is there any other questions as far as that department, the new one? Okay, then we have our last department, it's our ordinance department. We do have Belinda Kingsley here, she's our director of ordinance. So if you have any specific questions there, I'm sure she can help you. The narratives are all in here. I don't think I changed anything on this one. Oh, I take that back, I did have to change the supervision because I did have the executive coordinate position up in the sheriff, and I just put that portion down in ordinance because he's doing more in that department and nothing in the sheriff's department. So I did make a change there. But as far as that goes, that's the only change that I made. Do you have any questions? Okay. Thank you. That was a law enforcement budget. I do see that we have our Judge Washington and Magistrate Nelson here, and we can do the court, 14B court budget. So we just send out a revised version of that fund as well. I think that was in your packet. So would you like to come up? If you have any questions, I'm going to turn this over to Magistrate Nelson. Get out of your way there.
Good evening. We submitted a letter to the board with the packet along with the budget that tries to get into a bit of what's going on with courts in general and court funding across the board. I don't know if anybody had an opportunity to review that, but it gets into a number of legislative changes that have impacted the courts and our operations. It gets into, of course, we're still dealing with the ramifications of COVID and what the reductions we had there, and is slowly building back, but we're still sort of facing all of those challenges as well. So I mean, I laid out a number of things in that letter. So I'll start if there's any questions with regard to what we laid out in the letter there.
Mark, could we recognize Judge Washington?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want the record to reflect Judge Washington is also here this evening.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everybody.
Thank you, sorry.
Sure, yeah, no problem. So are there any questions on the letter? Are there any questions on our budget submission?
So we usually go through the revenue and, we start going through.
Do you have that, Joe?
Yes.
I've already copied. Thank you.
There you go.
Okay. So our grant, we received our grant award a few weeks ago, and that was $90,000 across the fiscal year, which covers 2 of our actual years. So we allocated 70 of that to the 23 budget. Next line is our shared revenue. That's our portion of what we pay for the judicial salary for Judge Washington. There's a corresponding expenditure line that goes along with that, so it nets out to 0. And then the rest of these are our projections as to what we're going to look like for 2023 as far as collections under each of these categories, whether it be fines or collections under civil fees. And so everything that's paid across, whether it's part of a ticket or part of a probation fee or whatever it is, sort of shakes out into these various categories that we pay out either to the township, the state, or the county. And they're all allocated out that way. What we have here is the portions that come back to the township.
So probation fees are activity-wise, right?
Yeah, probation fees is one of those lines that is money that primarily comes back to the township. So we're projecting those.
It's at 142.
Yeah, well.
As of this date.
Yeah, right. And so we're looking at, we're projecting 158 for next year, so not much of a change there for probation. Part of what's happening in the legislative changes that I referenced in my letter with regard to probation is the legislature has determined that probation is presumptively limited to half of a term of probation. So if Judge Washington puts somebody on probation for a year and the person is successful on their terms of probation at 6 months, they're automatically eligible for discharge. So that's going to reduce the amount of time the person's on probation, which will reduce the amount of probation fees. But there's more work that goes along with that because the probation department has to generate a letter to the defendant, to the prosecutor, and the public defender that this person's now up for discharge early. And if there's any objections, there has to be a hearing. So what they looked like they took away some work by making it shorter, but they added work by the process it takes to get some person off of probation. So what they give, they take away, sort of. That's one of the many legislative changes that have taken place over the last year affecting probation. The other thing is there's a presumption on non-assaultive crimes. So, for example, domestic violence, we certainly put somebody on probation, but any non-assaultive crimes, there's a presumption that somebody's not to be placed on probation. So legislatures imposed upon us as a court a duty to make a determination that somebody should be on probation for a rehabilitative purpose. So, for example, if somebody has a drunk driving charge, you can't put them on probation until the court makes a finding that probation would be beneficial to them. Now, drunk driving's, is a fairly easy finding to make because, you can say, well, look, the person has a drinking problem. We need to monitor them, make sure they're not continuing to drink while they're, for a period of time, and make sure they're taking care of those problems and get them into the places that can help them, to the victims impact panel that we've traditionally done, possibly to treatment if necessary, certainly monitoring and things of that nature. So we're still placing people on probation for drunk driving, but this legislation says we have to actually make a finding. There has to be part of the hearing, has to be a finding that probation is necessary for this person. And each case has to have that finding for probation. So where we had lots of people on probation before, the legislatures told us we have to scale that back. And then the people that are eligible, whether it's automatic or by finding, they're eligible for a reduction of half their probation term, with the exception of assaultive crimes. Like I said, drug court still has a 2-year probation. That can't be touched on a presumption of being dropped early. So that does have, like I said, some effects on our ability, what we're going to be looking at as far as collections go, but the work that goes into, we're running probation hasn't reduced at all. So that's kind of where we're at with that, which I know is way beyond the question you asked me. Were there any other specific line items I wanted to look at?
Mark, I just have one, and so the rest of the board knows that Mark has been gracious and been coming to our police services meetings on Mondays when he's available. And so I've shared this with Mark. He knows I was going to talk and ask about this, but when I see the fine columns go down from 380 to roughly 238, Mark has indicated to me in the past that that's because the volume of citations being written and brought into the court through the sheriff's office has greatly diminished. My concern with that is, and I have to look further, is in yesterday's police services meeting, they're indicating a 54% increase in citations written this year and a 99% increase in traffic stops. So I'm trying to figure out where the disconnect is, because there's clearly one, when the court is having less revenue come in on their end, but yet the sheriff's department is indicating a higher volume of citations being written. So somewhere there's an issue, and we just have to figure out what that is.
Yeah, so I mean,
is that fair, Mark? That's what I shared with you earlier.
And there's a handful of things going on there. One, I mean, I'm utilizing 2019 as sort of a baseline because that's pre-COVID. So, I mean, there are incremental changes. I mean, it is improving a little bit at a time, but I mean, it dropped, off precipitously, and a 55% increase off of a very low number, of course, is just an incremental increase. So, I mean, it probably is coming back. I have 2019 numbers and 2022 numbers here in front of me. And I can certainly run the last year's numbers for comparison, so you can get an email out to folks if that's something people would like to see. But the other legislative change that affects this directly is we're no longer allowed to suspend people's driver's license for non-payment of fines. So in October of last year, Secretary of State released over 6,000 driver's license suspensions from our court alone. And moving forward, we can only suspend on a limited number of cases for unpaid tickets. So it used to be anytime you didn't pay a speeding ticket, after 45 days, your license was suspended. Now you have a lot of incentive to come back and get that taken care of, pay it, and move on. Now there's no incentive to do that from that point of view, from the suspension. So there's no automatic thing to do. We certainly can look at other enforcement mechanisms, but the big in the most prevalent one was suspension of licenses. So there was that dropping of 6,200 suspensions. So now we have cases where we have people that were suspended in the past that, can get their licenses back, which is, the flip side of that, which is really good news for folks in our community. And we've been working with the township prosecutor in particular on those types of cases, working with people on getting their licenses back. So that's the flip side of it. From a non-revenue point of view, that's great news that people are, have fewer hurdles to getting their licenses back, and we're seeing more and more people getting their licenses back, which is great. But it does have this consequence here on this side of things, which gets us back to our ongoing problem with court funding. And one of the things I referenced in my letter to the board is there was a study done in 2019 on the status of court funding in the state of Michigan, and the conclusions of that report are that it's a broken system. And it's broken because we're having the conversations we're having right now that, the courts aren't collecting enough money to support themselves. Well, that shouldn't be the discussion, right? The discussion should be the good news that we're getting people back driving legally, and we're taking care of the problems of the community without an eye towards the financial implications to the operations of the court. That report concluded, and what we're seeing moving quite slowly is that state funding is going to be the solution to these court funding issues. They're starting next year. They've budgeted for a statewide computer systems to make everybody on the same computer systems statewide, for example, and we're already on that system. So they're going to bring along all the rest of the courts into that system. So that's sort of step one that the legislature's taken. Now, it's a very small step, but it's a step they're taking just towards state funding of the entire court systems. So that's really where we need to get to. Another part of the conversation Trustee Aldridge and I had earlier was there's a Supreme Court case, reference Cunningham, People v. Cunningham, that found that the collections of court costs was unconstitutional. The state legislature has made it legal to collect under legislation. That legislation has been sunsetting. I think it's the third time they've renewed that. It's due to sunset again in May of 2024. So there's about a year and a half that they have to sort that out. So that may be the period of time that it takes for them to sort out and figure out what state funding of courts is going to look like. But as you can imagine, it'll be a huge undertaking for that. So again, I'm sort of on the side of where we are with the budget, but that's sort of the background of what's going on in Lansing. It's having impacts on us here locally.
Drunk drivers, if their license are suspended.
So drunk driving, you mean?
And drug driving.
Yeah, there's still licensing sanctions for those. Yeah, and that's still one of the things that I believe was eligible. I'm sure is eligible for a suspension if they're non-compliant with the terms of their sentencing. So that's one of them. No proof of insurance is one of the big ones that people are still getting suspended on. I guess the insurance lobby had something to do with that. I don't know, but everything else, speeding, running a stop sign, all your garden variety, traffic stops. If you don't pay those, there's no sanction from Secretary of State on that.
So if you get a ticket, does it matter? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it matters. I mean, like I said, we have some collection mechanisms that are much more labor intensive for us because there's nothing automatic that happens through Secretary of State. You're going to get the points. You're going to get the effect on your driving. Your driving record is going to show the points. Your insurance company is going to get reported the points. Those things are still going to happen. But our best enforcement mechanism for collecting fines was on those types of matters was the fact that they had a suspended license. Anybody who was interested in not having a suspended license had to come back and pay their tickets. And that's just not there anymore.
Just the number one issue and the number one request that we often get is speeding in neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And so they do speed enforcement, and it's a discretion of the officer whether they want to, give them a ticket or give them a warning, whatever.
Yep.
But I'm trying to understand what you said is that you can get a ticket and you don't have to pay it, but it's still reported to.
I mean, you're still going to get your points on your license, and if you accumulate enough points on your license, they'll take your license away, at some point. Your insurance company is still going to get reported that you had a speeding ticket. Those things will still happen. But if nobody comes to the court and pays their $120 for a 5 mile per hour speeding ticket, you won't be suspended just for that. Which used to be every ticket that you got was subject to a suspension, and, after 45 days.
I know a lot of people that got a speeding ticket, didn't pay it, and lost their license. And
Yeah.
I agree that causes a lot of downward spiral
Yeah.
effects for
Yeah.
people. All people, really.
Right. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So I understand that, but I'm not clear on if you get a ticket, it's reported, but you don't have to pay a ticket, ever? Is that?
No, I mean, you owe the money to the court. I mean, if
So what happens?
if we had the resources, we could theoretically bring somebody in and, have a show cause hearing, but we'd have to hold a hearing, notice up for a hearing, have a hearing, make a determination as whether or not they're willfully not paying the ticket. If they're financially able to pay the ticket, then we could, find them in contempt for not paying the ticket. But the flip side of that, and that same legislation, is that if they're unable to pay the ticket, then we would have to either, reduce the fine or dismiss the fine. But that would all be very, hearing room intensive, judicial intensive, staff intensive. So we're still grappling with how we're going to handle that piece of it.
We used to set up payments for people.
Oh, absolutely, we do that, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that.
No, we haven't stopped doing anything we've traditionally done.
Because that allows
Yeah.
people, the opportunity
Right.
to set up payments versus.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we still have that, and we've just, in fact, yesterday, got our online text reminder system up and going, so people that are on payment plans are going to get text messages, remind them they have a payment coming up and things like that. So we're working with people. If people come and engage with us, we're definitely working with them, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I said, just that automatic, losing your license for not paying a ticket doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, they changed, that's what they changed.
That's the legislative change, right.
And the police were not writing tickets during COVID, so that was
Right.
a lot of it.
Yeah, we lost, you're right. I mean, 2020, 2021, and it's slowly building back up. Like I said, my comparisons and what I indicated in my letter are sort of using 2019 as a baseline. And that's why you're seeing still a reduction in the amount of our fines and cost collections. As part of that baseline is that we've not gotten back to 2019 levels.
So you mentioned a 5 mile per hour over. Wonder if it's 10 or 15 or 20 or 25, or is there different levels?
Yeah, so the fines are different, right, and the points are different. So 1 to 5 over on a surface street is a $120 fine with 1 point. 6 to 10 is 130 with 2 points, and so it kind of builds on up there. So that's all dependent on what the deputy writes the ticket for.
And our deputies were riding for impeding traffic, so it didn't go on the insurance, is my understanding?
That's slightly different. So we have an online program for that. They'll write the actual citation for whatever it was. They can request an online review of their ticket that goes back to the sergeant at the sheriff's department. They look at it, look at their driving record, and if they want to make them an offer for impeding traffic at that point in time, then it gets reduced to that or changed to that. So that's a 0-point non-moving violation, which would not appear on your driving record. So it's something they have to engage in. It's not typically given on the road. That's something that's run through a process that we.
So that's another thing that helps people
Absolutely.
not increase their insurance, and that's.
Yeah.
So I think there's been a lot of opportunity. I don't know how much it's communicated to people.
Yeah, anybody that contacts us, we'll give them every opportunity that they need to help themselves. So, I mean, if people are coming into us, we tell them that you can go to this, and it's right on our website. You click on that. It's a fairly straightforward system, runs through, like I said, back to the sheriff's department. They do a review of it, make sure that there's not something else going on. I mean, really bad driving records, for example, or if there was a crash involved or whatever it may be. But for the most part, they grant those requests.
And what happens if they don't have a computer, Mark?
Well, they can call. I mean,
Okay.
we will facilitate it. We'll make it work. But yeah, I mean,
Okay.
that doesn't happen often. But I mean, if it's something that somebody needs assistance, we'll make it happen.
Because I do know people who've gotten speeding tickets, and if they can make a payment,
Yeah.
and it's not against their insurance, I don't know the proper terminology, then
Right.
they're thankful for that.
Yeah.
Because then their insurance doesn't go up. Because if their insurance goes up, they're not going to be able to pay it.
Right.
And what I heard you say, if you don't have any insurance, the state of Michigan says that your license is suspended?
If you there's two different things. There's a civil infraction for no proof of insurance. That's you have insurance, but you're driving without your little piece of paper that says you have insurance. That's, if you don't pay that, that's one of the things that still can be suspended. If you have proof of insurance and you bring it into the court, the way that ticket works, usually, if you have your proof of insurance, you bring it back to the court, it's a $25 fee. Okay, if you ignore that and don't pay it, that's still subject to a suspension. That's the one thing that stayed as a suspension. There's a misdemeanor charge for driving without insurance. That's different entirely. So if you're driving a vehicle and have not acquired insurance, right, I mean, you're not paying your premiums and you don't have insurance, that's a misdemeanor charge. That's a 1-year misdemeanor, $500 fine. That's different from the no proof of insurance, civil infraction.
So if you're caught not carrying it on you, then you can get your license suspended.
If you don't pay it.
You don't pay.
If you don't pay it, yeah.
What if you have it? It's $25?
If you have proof, you bring it back to the court, yeah, that's the way the legislature set that piece of it up. It's a $25 fee to come back once you.
My understanding is that and I'm not 100% correct, but that you can actually look up to see if you have insurance on that vehicle. The police officer can.
Yeah, as they're initiating a traffic stop, there's a database that shows if there's insurance. Now, the problem with that is it updates every 2 weeks, so you may not have had insurance 2 weeks ago, but you have it, you do have it then, so it's not 100% reliable, and I'm not sure that they're allowed to pull somebody over just based on that. That's a question for the sheriff's department, but yeah, there is a database that one of the things they can do as they're preparing to pull somebody over is find out if they have insurance or not, at least within that 2-week window as that system's updated.
So I'm assuming the no proof of insurance suspension on you is because of their no fault law in the state. I'm guessing, I don't know, because why would they just choose that one particular violation,
Yeah, I could make a couple of guesses too, I don't know.
No clue. I don't have anything. Thank you.
Mark, I just have one more question, maybe the judge, either one of you, because I know you're both well connected with different committees and things. And you had indicated that, and I forget the name of the group, that's looking at different ways for funding mechanisms. Mm-hmm. Have they ever talked about, in those meetings, a different way of doing business moving forward? Meaning, in this county, we currently have 6 district courts.
3
You ever talked, pardon?
I'm sorry to interrupt, there's 3 district courts.
Well, locations, I guess. I'm looking at 6 different locations.
Okay.
Have they ever looked at consolidating down, rather than 6 buildings or 3 courts, doing something different? You're always going to have Ann Arbor City is going to have their own district court. I get that. But do we need 14A, 14B, a site in Chelsea, a site in Saline, a site in the city, a site in the township? Do we need all of those? Is there a way to consolidate services so that you're reducing the amount of output that each municipality has to then put back into it? Being more efficient without losing service.
Sure. So 14A and 14B are 2 entirely separate courts, of course. So, we're here and, we can't cross-pollinate, our services necessarily.
Well, I know that, but you guys still go and do weekend arraignments.
Yeah,
so we still work together.
We have some we have some agreements, yeah, and
Right.
that's absolutely true. The separate court buildings with regard to 14A are all of creatures statute. So each city up to a certain population is allowed to have a court. And I know there's some discussions in, say,
Right.
Chelsea, for example, as to whether or not their court's going to stay or it's going to stay open all the time and things of that nature. So, their satellite courts are sort of, separate from us. I don't know that there's a mechanism to, reconsolidate courts. I mean, that would all be a legislative issue, a question.
Right. Well, if they're looking, State Representative, at changing the mechanism of how we fund courts, maybe they would also be open to the way and how we allocate where they go. It just seems like we're working with an antiquated system from many years ago.
That's entirely possible. I mean, of course, the
we
one
need
thing.
to look at different ways of doing business. Because it's difficult for all municipalities to see these kind of numbers come in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and I would wholeheartedly agree, as much as it might shock everybody in the room, when I was in police work, I was not a prolific ticket writer because that doesn't change behavior. It just doesn't change behavior. There's other ways to do it. So
And I certainly don't want to give the impression that that's what we're after.
No, I know you're not.
That's just the metric that we have.
Yeah, I know you're not, but my point is the way the system is set up, that's what they're forcing courts and municipalities and police to do. There has to be a different way to fund the courts, one, and I agree with that wholeheartedly, because simply issuing tickets and taking money away from people is not going to change.
Right.
It's only going to harm people even more. But part two of that is there a better way to do business in 2023 than there was in 1923?
Right.
We're still working under the same systems.
I've noticed Judge Washington stepped
I
up here.
saw
She may
that.
have a comment.
I must have, yeah. Yeah, it's the same way.
Good afternoon, everyone. The only comment I wanted to make was with respect to the question of whether or not there is a mechanism for the consolidation. And I don't know the exact date of the study, but a study was done, and I believe it was probably about 9 or 10 years ago, where they took a look at the populations as to whether or not there was a need for additional judges or to cut down on judges. They do those studies regularly. When they studied here, initially there was actually some concern that 15th had half more judges than they needed, and that this court needed an extra judge. So in terms of whether or not jurisdictionally they will ever consolidate, that's a question for the legislature to look at as well. But with respect to the number of judges and the necessity in terms of the population that we're serving, they found that this court actually needed a little bit more. So I just wanted to put that out there. But I believe that when the state actually takes up the issue instead of sunsetting it, that the funding issue will become less of an issue on the municipalities, which is a burden, and will be then a state issue. And so I completely understand your concerns, and I appreciate the board for all that you do for us in terms of the court. Thank you.
Thank you. Judge Washington?
I would just want to mention that recently the counties actually, I don't know which level of courts, so forgive me if I don't know which type of courts, but I know that recently on their agenda, they are making decisions about whether there's going to be some improvements or upgrades or things that are happening. So I think there's 2 locations. I don't want to misspeak and say, but they are currently. So if what you're asking for seems like if they're making decisions without asking some of the same questions, they're making investments in places. They're making decisions about investments in places, and that's not for me to say whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But if we're not thinking about the funding, that's just going to increase the costs if we're making improvements someplace without thinking about other ways to do it. But that's been on their agenda at least the last couple of meetings.
I suspect they're doing an expansion to their Saline Court, and they're doing I believe some improvements there at Chelsea Court. I think that may be what you saw in the recent agendas.
Mark, I just had, because we had spoken earlier, can you just explain to the rest of the board, maybe people here, what the drug court is, how that's working, and some of the successes you're seeing? Because
Sure. So our drug court we've had in place now for 7 years, I believe. It's a 2-year intensive probation for people that qualify. And the big thing that people get out of that is services, so direct access to services. We have a coordinator and another person that assists them. This is all grant-funded positions. Nothing's coming out of our budgets for these folks. What happens when somebody's sentenced in a drug court? First of all, they have to be referred over to us. We screen them to see if they're eligible to be part of drug court, and part of that is it's voluntary. You have to say you want this. We want to do the work for it. It's a 2-year program. Once you're brought into the drug court, the first thing that happens is you're given an assessment to see what level of services you need. Some folks may need to move right into a lockdown residential treatment center and stay there for a number of months and receive direct services that way. Some people come to us and have already had some sobriety prior to their sentencing, and they may just need to move into a transitional housing, or what's sometimes called a 3-quarter house, where they come and go as they want, but they're living there with other sober people, and they have sober meetings within the house and things of that nature. Those are all run primarily through what's called the access line. People are assessed through that and get their service through that. If they're Medicaid qualified, that's covered through that. If they're not, then we have some funding available to cover the cost of that. They're drug testing frequently. They're required to attend 12-step meetings or the equivalent of on a frequent basis. We have court hearings much more frequently than we do with other probationers. They're in court twice a month when they start out. We run 2 separate tracks, one's for men, one's for women. So every other week, one's men's, one's women. And that goes on for 2 years. Obviously, as they're improving and getting better and going along, their necessity to come into court and the level of treatment they have and things like that lessen as they improve. You don't need to keep as close tabs on somebody that's doing things on their own, and that's the idea. Is, I mean, after 2 years, we want to make sure that they're in a position where they can continue to maintain their sobriety and continue to function in our society without coming back into the criminal justice system. And we actually, Judge Washington met with our representative from the Supreme Court on the last month or so, and correct me if I'm wrong, we were told we have the lowest recidivism rate in the state, meaning that our graduates are not breaking the law again, which means that they're staying sober, because if they didn't stay sober, they'd be breaking the law again. So we, right here in little Ypsilanti Township, are beating everybody else in the state with regard to our outcomes there, which is just awesome. Giovanna was just asking if we're the only court in the area that does that. So there's, for district courts, for misdemeanor charges, we are the only court in Washtenaw County. They just started recently a felony court in the circuit court for people that are charged with felony charges for different drug charges. So they're just getting off the ground with their felony drug court there, but we're the only one in the county doing misdemeanor charges.
And Mark, and I'm just going over the questions that Mark and I talked earlier. Can you just explain to them the additional work that you do on the weekends with arraignments and how that goes?
Sure.
And how it's countywide? Yeah,
so we do what are referred to as arraignments, 365 days a year, holidays, weekends, everything. And that's split between the 3 magistrates here in the county. So I do it, the magistrate for 14A does it, and the magistrate for 15th District Court does it on a rotating basis. Those are for anybody charged with domestic violence that we need to get arraigned immediately. The idea being anybody charged with domestic violence in the vast majority of the cases is giving conditions of their release. And part of those conditions is no contact with the alleged victim. So we want to make sure that those persons are seen as soon as possible, and those conditions are put out into the law enforcement information network as soon as possible to make sure that we have a safe, that the case moves forward safely. That's the primary concern with domestic violence is we don't want the person back out with any sort of mechanism to make sure that the victim's safe. We also see any felony warrant charges at that point in time not fail to appear. I mean, if they have a bond because they didn't show up to court and they're sitting on a bond, they'll see the magistrate on the following Monday. But if it's a new arrest on a felony charge or an existing felony charge they've never been arraigned on, we'll do those arraignments as well.
What kind of felony,
Any felony.
for example?
Drunk driving, third offense,
Domestic violence, third offense.
domestic violence, third offense, resisting,
Murder?
obstructing police, murder, yeah.
So the magistrates
We deal
will
with that.
hear those, what do you call them, preliminary hearing?
Arraignments.
Arraignment.
Arraignments, yeah. Now, an arraignment in our court system, an arraignment is, you have a right to know what you're charged with, so we read the charges to them. We make sure that they're aware of their rights, their criminal, so they have the right to, what you hear on TV, you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney, you have the right to trial. We give them all that stuff. The public defender's there, the prosecutor's there. We set bond, we set conditions of bond, so we're allowed to, in addition to a monetary bond if it's necessary, and those monetary bonds are in place to assure public safety or to assure appearance at future court dates. But we also set safety conditions. So we set pretrial monitoring, drug testing. If they have a firearm and they've been charged with some sort of assault, we can require the firearm be surrendered, or firearms, and if there's multiple ones, be surrendered to the sheriff's department prior to release. We can do monitoring, GPS tracking, drug testing, things of that nature, all to ensure that there's, that everybody's safe as those processes are going along. So we've split those amongst the three courts, and we rotate in there. So
And it's 14A,
14A,
14B, and Washtenaw County?
15th District Court now. So 14A,
Which is?
Ann Arbor. 15th is Ann Arbor.
On Saturday and Sunday.
Saturday and Sunday, both, yep, and all holidays, 365 days a year.
So I only asked these so you guys would know it, but it leads into my next one is, although we're an Ypsilanti Township-based court, we provide services countywide, and we assist countywide. So my next one is, we're the only district court, maybe the only court in Washtenaw County that doesn't have security.
Correct.
And so if we're helping and assisting our neighbors in all these other jurisdictions with the drug court, helping out with the arraignments, I'm hoping we can eventually get that same assistance in return from the Board of Commissioners to help pay for security for the only courtroom in Washtenaw County that doesn't have it. Would that be fair? You're the only one that doesn't have it.
We are, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's between you and the county. I'm not going to.
I know, no, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
We did budget $200,000 for security,
Personnel, yeah.
personnel, and some equipment that
Equipment.
you walk through that,
Okay. And I know that's been in the budget for last,
help me with words.
yeah, magnetometer, x-ray machines, things of that nature, yeah.
So we-
And I know that's been in the police services budget for the last few years, and we sort of had.
Last year and this year, yeah.
Yeah, it was, I believe it was the previous year, but anyway. So there's two things going on. One, we had COVID where it wasn't a necessity for it for a little while. We didn't have as many people. We're back to people are in the building frequently now. So I've been in contact and discussions with the sheriff's department, the commander of the jail, who also handles security for the police sheriff's department, and they don't have people. They're like everything else, like your road deputies, like everything else ever. They're having a hiring crisis, and they don't have enough people to fulfill a contract. So they won't entertain a contract until they have the people hired. They're working on that. I know they're hiring people as we speak, and I'm due to have a conversation with the commander over there again to see where they are as far as that's concerned. So
We also spoke about alternatives to just the sheriff's department.
there's
There's other alternatives out there, but my whole point in all this is, starting back with the 266 budget with law enforcement or ordinance, this is all a collaborative effort. And if we're going to do this collaboratively, that means fully as far as funding it and everything else. That's my only point in saying, I'm not asking you to get involved in that
Right.
discussion, but
Yeah. Now, in fairness, I mean, there's some reciprocity on the arraignment side of things. They handle all the files for felony cases are handled at the 14A District Court. All of the preliminary examinations and probable cause conferences are handled in their facility. So our judge goes once a month over there to do those cases. Twice a month, I apologize. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut to twice a month. She's over there, rather than doing them. We'd have to do them every single week if they were all handled here in house, and they would be felony cases, and we would have a much larger security issue at that point in time. So there's it is a partnership on the felony side of things, and the arraignments is part of that partnership. So it's been in that way for decades, and it's worked very well. So
goes back to my point, because we've done it for decades, doesn't mean we need to do it going forward. There has to be a different way to do business.
I appreciate that, but I just want to make sure that there's understanding that we benefit from that relationship too.
Just so I have clarity.
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand the weekend and when our judge has to do felony arraignments.
No, it's me.
I said our judge.
Oh, she's doing,
That's our judge.
but I'm doing the arraignments.
So,
She's doing,
Not-
yeah, there's
so
two
we're
different
talking
things.
about two different things.
Yeah.
One is the
Can
felony.
you just speak? into
Yes,
the-
we're talking about two different things. One is the felony arraignments, which is what the magistrates do on the weekends, versus the preliminary examination. So after a person has already been arraigned, the next step in that process at the felony level is what's called a probable cause conference. Probable cause conference, they determine whether or not they're going to go on to a preliminary examination. At a preliminary examination, that's when the prosecution has to show, by a probable cause standard, whether a crime was committed and that person committed it. Those are the ones that district court judges rotate on, the preliminary examination. And so those are usually about 3 to 4 weeks later in the process. And so those are the ones that I go out on twice per month.
So when you go there, who else goes? All the other judges?
The judges are rotating. So if I go out, for instance, today, that's where I was earlier today,
Okay.
Judge Valvo was handling a section of the cases, and then I was handling a section of the cases. And so, for instance, on my docket today, there were 16 cases. So they could choose to hold each and every one of those examinations or not hold those examinations, or maybe the prosecution can't proceed. But we filter through those throughout that morning and figure out what's happening. So then I handled those in my morning, and then in the afternoon I came back, and while I was a little late coming here, I had bench trials in the afternoon. So that's how that process works.
So even though, we don't hear cases for felonies, right? Only the county does? Am I right on that?
We hear the preliminary examinations only, but then once it's bound over to what is circuit court, at that circuit court level is where they are going to hear whether or not they have a pretrial and a trial and other things that happen, and they determine whether or not that person actually is guilty. So, okay, so we determine whether they have probable cause to believe that they committed that crime. If we find that there's probable cause, then it goes on up to the felony stage.
And then once it goes to the felony, do you stay with that case?
No, I do not. It
That
goes to the circuit court judges.
That's what I'm trying to.
And process, yeah.
Just to
Yeah.
make sure I understand. The district court, the 14A, 14B.
And 15th.
And Ann Arbor Court? And 14A is county, right? Am I right?
That's the balance of the county with the exception of Ypsilanti Township and the city of Ann Arbor. So yeah, every other municipality in the county with the exception of our two municipalities is 14A.
And 14A is like a district court?
It's a district court, same as us, yep.
So it's, okay. And they hear all the cases in Washtenaw County on district issues there?
Any case that originates in their jurisdiction, which is anything outside of Ypsilanti Township in the city of Ann Arbor, originates with the 14A district court. Yeah, so this gets a little in the weeds, but every single criminal case starts out as a district court case. We make a determination, as Judge Washington described, that there's probable cause that a felony was committed. Then it's transferred to circuit court and it becomes a circuit court case. So, and the other thing that could happen in that case, it could be dismissed at that point because there's no probable cause, or there could be a finding or a plea that it's a misdemeanor charge, and then we keep the case.
District court keeps the case.
Yeah.
It might not necessarily be us.
Right.
So
Okay.
we're handling cases for each district court. So I don't go out and just handle 14B. I go out and I handle cases that originated in Ann Arbor. I handle cases that originated in Ypsilanti Township. I handle cases that originated in the rest of the county.
The felony ones?
Yes. Yes.
The felony outside of our district court? And you do weekend felony arraignments?
Correct, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, look at me.
Yeah.
I'm getting this.
And holidays.
Yeah, and there's only 3 of the magistrates.
Yep.
And you just rotate that. Does your staff go with you?
Yeah, my recorder comes with me, yeah.
And that's via Zoom right now?
Yeah, so we do them from here via Zoom, yeah, from my
Do you
court.
anticipate Zooming continue?
Zoom's going to
At the state
continue.
level?
Zoom's going to continue for a number of things. They're going through some court rule comment periods to determine what's going to be, presumptively via Zoom, like landlord-tenant cases. That I think is up tomorrow for comment, and they could determine that all landlord-tenant cases have to stay on Zoom. That could be a Supreme Court order that says those all have to stay that way. A lot of the stuff is up to the courts as to whether or not it's a Zoom case or not a Zoom case. What we're doing, and what I think most courts are doing, is anything where testimony has to be taken is going to be a live case, because you lose the benefit of face-to-face interaction if you don't have the people in the same room.
Live is in person?
In person, yeah. So all of our trials, many of the violations where somebody has to testify, anything like that, is going to be an in-person case. Their first appearances with me, arraignments, are on Zoom right now, and that may continue. Certainly traffic tickets are going to continue on Zoom, I would think. But we're sort of feeling our way through all that from the state level on down to all the local courts.
And I think Zoom is good for some people, but what about the people and that's who I hear
Right.
from,
So there's
people who
yeah. So there's a couple of
have a
things.
tough time, and I actually watched one of Judge Washington's, it was landlord-tenant, and some of the participants were having a hard time logging in and keeping their internet connection. That is a challenge. I mean,
Absolutely, yeah.
what do we do? Do we accommodate that?
Absolutely.
How?
A couple of things. One, we can always bring a hearing here. We can always do that. I mean, if the people can't, connect with remotely, we can always bring all the parties here, put a pause on things and bring them into the courtroom. We also have a device here in our hallway that has, absolutely reliable connection.
That's good.
And we have assistants there. So if somebody comes in and they can't handle it. Our bailiff will get them on there, get them set
Help
up,
them out, okay.
put them on there, and then all they have to do is interact as if they were, doing it from home.
One other piece. Anyone can request an in-person hearing. That's the way it's set up right now. So if you request an in-person hearing, you come in, you have your hearing in person. The other thing that I want the board to know is, in criminal matters, when a person is giving me a difficult time, or I fear that they're going to cause issues for, let's say, their victims in the case, and they need to be incarcerated, those are the people that we order to come into the courthouse. And so those are obviously the most dangerous people that we're ordering to come into the courthouse as well, which gets back to that security issue that we have. And so I thought you should probably know that piece. So we do have a fair number of people that are coming into the courthouse now, not just for those reasons, but for reasons like Mark said, the fact that they don't have access to a system at home. And so they come in and they use our system. For the fact that they think that they need to be there and they actually don't need to be there, but they come in anyway, and then we allow them to be there. So if anyone requested in the civil context recently, we had a couple of people who demanded to have in-person hearings. They come in and they have their hearings in front of whoever it's before at that particular time. So.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Just a question for the judge or magistrate. Well, I know it's recorded, but what kind of, I know you have cameras. Are there body security? Do you have that yet, as the other counties?
That depends on what you define as a body security. We have a person who works the front desk and basically shifts people to where they need to go, but we don't have what I consider to be true security. We have a bailiff that will come into the courtroom when is necessary, and the benefit of that is usually there's someone who is a retired sheriff, so they have that experience in handling matters and de-escalating if necessary. We're very fortunate that we have not had an incident to date, but like I said, that's based on fortuity and not the reality of us actually having security.
Thank you.
I just had a question, and I guess the piggybacking on this security. So I thought that you didn't have security on weekends and holidays, but you don't have security, period.
Correct, yeah. I mean, there's nobody coming in on weekends or holidays, so that's a non-issue. But, yeah, every day of the week, 5 days a week, we do have a bailiff here on site. And we're working on enhancing their toolkit, so to speak, as to what they have available to them to provide security. But we don't have any screening at the door. We don't have anything of that nature. We work, as I mentioned earlier, something we're working on, and that's another project we have will be brought to the board at some point. Is what we're looking at as far as. If you recall, we hired an architect and some consultants to give us some direction on that, and that's coming back to y'all for. To see where we are as far as that's concerned here. At some point, I wanted to get through this piece first, and then bring that back to you. So, right. But yeah, that's an ongoing work in progress. We have a security committee that meets regularly. The union's involved with us. The Supreme Court does have a security expert that I've engaged with a number of times. So, these are all things that are we're pushing forward.
All right, thank you.
So, did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because I was looking at the fact of weekends and holidays, which were bad enough, because if everybody's off and there's no security, then there's that risk. But to know that there's no security overall is very concerning.
Yeah, we certainly share that concern.
Trustee Swanton?
Yeah, I just wondered, when you talked about, or Trustee Eldridge referenced the lowest recidivism rate, is there a report or something that's been created about, like, what that is and, like, what's actually being done? Is there a way that we could get more information about that? Because I think whatever you're doing, when we come back and the other plans and stuff, I'd like to know about what actually is happening and what you're doing there. And what would be needed regarding space, location, those types of things, just to have more information about that, if it's working, how that looks with the requests that we're with space and
Yeah.
the upgrades and those types of
Yeah,
things.
the recidivism rate is to the narrow category of people in drug court. And there is a report for that. The state maintains a website for all the drug courts, and I can get that, a link to that disseminated to people.
I understood that part, but I'm
Yeah.
just thinking if you're doing something really well, which it sounds like we are, what does it look like? And because we would want to move towards, I would think, that kind of, like, we want to make sure you have the space to do whatever, and then to
Appreciate that.
keep that growing, especially if we're the lowest in the state. You're doing something very well.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Is that the court innovation grant, right?
Correct, yeah.
And it's for human trafficking docket and drug court.
Yeah, I mean, we originally started out with a big emphasis on the human trafficking side of things. That was sort of when we still had, the very visible issue in the township on Michigan Avenue and Ecorse. We started out to sort of address that. Sort of the same time we brought our grant funding on board and started that program, the internet commerce took over, and so we still certainly have a number of people that fall into those categories, but we're not able to proactively get them into our program. So it's certainly one of the criteria we're looking for, particularly with the women, is that history, the human trafficking history or the trauma that's associated with that. So that certainly is part of it. And then with the men, it's primarily not a human trafficking issue, but a substance use issue.
Human trafficking, I didn't hear what you said.
Human trafficking is which it goes hand in hand with prostitution and things like that. So that's the women's side of thing primarily. Not to say that there's unique one way or the other, but so we do have the two tracks. So we're focused on that on the female side, and the male side is primarily just substance use, not the human trafficking side.
That's usually the root, right?
Yeah.
That's
Trauma and everything. Yeah.
And is this countywide? Like
Our
residents countywide come to us for this innovation grant?
Our defendants can be referred for any of the courts in the county.
Yeah.
I believe right now, probably over half originate here in the township. I don't have the exact number, but it seems like as we're going through our reviews, I think most of our cases are. Is that right, Judge?
I would say that, I haven't looked at the raw data on that, but I would say that that's fairly close, that most of them originate from here, about half of them, and then the other half originates from other parts of the county. But we service anyone who lives in this county, and that is one of the criteria, that you must live in the county. So we may have someone that goes out and commits a crime way out in Southfield, but yet they live in our county. So if they meet the requirements of that service, then they can still be referred back to us. So we have some individuals who are also out county but reside in this county that get those services as well.
Yeah, and I agree with Debbie. It's sometimes we just do the work and we don't really express how successful we are or what we're good at, and people often like to talk about negative things, but there's a lot of positive things that 14B has been leaders in for years and years and years, and this is one of them. And if we can get maybe an update or report, I know we have to submit reports, right, as a grant administrator, Mark, you have to submit them. And I approve the purchase orders and the costs for that you submit to us, but we don't really talk about and measure the success of it,
Right. Yeah, we're pretty bad about patting ourselves on our back, but
We don't, because
Yeah.
we just keep working.
yeah.
We keep working, and that's
Yeah.
what we've always done, but this day and age, I think we should tell our story more, because people don't know the stories of how many things are done.
Absolutely.
And it's a good thing, and it's something to be proud of. And we are proud of it, but then we just go right on to the next, assignment that we have and don't celebrate it. So that would be great to get more information on that and to maybe, have a report that we can give. And can you break down how many Zoom courts we have and how many, or what do you call it, in-person versus Zoom? Is that...
It's, what do you mean?
Is it 80, 20, you think?
It's probably In my courtroom, it's in the 90th percentile, but my stuff's way more conducive to Zoom than the judge's is, and I'll let the judge speak to what she
Well,
wants
I
to
know landlord-tenant, and there was a lot that day.
Oh, yeah.
And that's still all Zoom.
That depends on the day you caught, so a lot is, like, for instance, tomorrow we have 119 cases on the docket right now, for me alone.
For landlord-tenant?
For landlord-tenant in the
Yeah.
afternoon. So I would still say if you take all of the cases together, whether it's 119 for landlord-tenant and then maybe the 50-some-odd in the morning for your criminal docket, I would say that altogether you're probably looking at about an 80-20 breakdown because like I said, we only bring in people who need to be present or want to be present for those. And the only thing I'm going to say is I certainly hope that the courts do not move to just having landlord-tenant in a Zoom environment. As you probably watched, that docket is very hard to manage in a Zoom environment, especially since we've just left the stage of having SARA. So most of you probably know what the SARA funding was and how people were getting assistance. We don't have that safety net for people anymore. And it's a very difficult process to maneuver where I'm trying to come up with payment plans for the attorneys and the tenants in the same environment. And our eviction rates are up a whole lot right now. And it just makes more sense that the attorneys will have more access to have direct communication to try to work out payment plans. I think it would benefit everyone. And so that's what I'm hoping for, to bring that particular docket back into a in-person environment as opposed to what we're doing right now. But as Magistrate Nelson just said, that depends on what our Supreme Court says that we can and cannot do.
And they asked for your input, Judge?
They ask for everyone's input. Giving me the time to give that input is a very different story. I'm on the docket in the morning with 50-some-odd cases, so that's the part that you just mentioned, that we're off doing the next thing, because I'm always pretty much on the docket in some way, shape, or form.
Yep. Understandable. Are there any other questions?
No, I just want to say thank you to both of you for being here to presenting. And the other thing I would just want to say is, like, your compassion for serving people is clear every time you come in front of us. So I just want to say thank you on behalf of the Township Board, that we appreciate the work that you do, and especially the way you do it together. Like, you work well together, and the compassion always comes through. So thank you for that.
Thank you for saying that. Appreciate that. And and I'd like to extend that to our staff too, because I mean, they do a great job for us out front and take care of what we need to take care of as well. So I appreciate that. I think Joe had some budgetary good news she wanted to share.
Yeah, so I just wanted to go back to the numbers. Back to the numbers. On the side note, the court is going to have to ask for about $850,000 from the general fund to help with their operations, because of all we've talked about, the revenue that's up there. Can't get around that. However, what I did want to go focus on now is the expenditures, because we didn't touch those. And we do have budgeted a 3% increase. I still believe, Karen Wallen, is the contract still under negotiation? So it's still under negotiation, but the assumption for the wages was at a 3% increase, the same as our other unions. So that is budgeted in here, all the fringes. And I just wanted to point out that the original budget for 2022 was $1,794,775. And the budget that we have going forward for 23 is $1,712.84. So, or 84, not cents, 84,000. I did not say that right. I am so sorry. $1,712,084. There we go. So it's a difference of roughly around $80,000, and that is attributed to the drop in the OPEB pension expenses. We are, since that is a closed pension for healthcare, that number has gone down. So that actually did go down $80,000. I just wanted to point that out. So was there any other questions on the expenditure lines?
The healthcare was budgeted at 20% increase and is,
Well, we did adjust that back to the 7.97. My numbers are. Yeah, so those are all adjusted.
yeah, so that, that was a positive news, you know. That's why I need to understand the sheriff's department's increase of 54%, but they have more knowledge, so try to get clarity on that.
Just trying to understand, because I guess I'm looking at an old budget. When you said 850,000, was that because expenses were over revenues?
That is correct.
Okay, so I am looking at an older budget.
Yeah, so what we have right here, so we
It's
did
in the
send-
packet.
It's in the packet, so it's not in your budget book. So your
That's a
budget book.
draft. The budget book is a draft. That's, it's in your board packet.
Okay.
That's just a draft budget that was handed out.
In
Yeah.
August,
Okay.
at the end of August.
So-
Okay, I got you.
We're getting closer and closer to the numbers as we get closer and closer to the end of the year.
Right, yeah, so adjustments were made, and we put out one in the packet. So is there any other questions that we have over any of the expenditures on 14B District Court?
We do have a public hearing set for the next board meeting. So in 2 weeks, we'll have a public hearing on it. Elizabeth here is amazing.
I do have one more.
Deputy supervisor.
I do have one more fund.
Yeah. That's for the entire, oh, yeah.
We have one more fund to cover.
One
Let's
more
get-
small
Let's
one.
get this one out. This
I'm sorry,
will
one
not take
small
very
one.
long. This is, yeah.
I'm sorry.
You got that? Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have one more fund, and we're done actually going through all of our funds. So this fund is called our Nuisance Abatement Fund, and this fund is used for when we have to do board ups, do lawn mowing for vegetation, any of those type of things like that where we have to have someone go out and perform professional services. And then what we do is we bill the residents for that service, and then it comes back in the revenue form. So it's supposed to really offset each other. We do have the capability of putting the noxious weeds, the vegetation that is not paid, we can put them on their tax bills, which we do. Otherwise, that's pretty much, we try to collect the fees that we've charged for board ups and, hauling junk away or whatever that needs to be. So, and Belinda Kingsley is in charge of that, as well as our community director. I'm sorry, that's not the right title. Community Compliance Director. She's also in charge of this fund. So if you have any questions on that, she's here to answer any. We do have the narratives down, and it really is supposed to be, we provide this, we have the services done. The ordinances officers or administrators go out and they'll tag things and have somebody come out and do the jobs if the people have not complied.
Madam Chair, I just have one quick question. Could you tell me what is the bright service charge? What is that? I see it flushed, it went up and down, then it evened off at 10,000. So what is the bright service charge?
The blight.
Yeah, I think it says.
So blight is for like junk, like if there's something that they have to go clean up. If there's garbage that have to be cleaned up and we have to have a service go do that. Belinda, who is the person that we have go?
Looking Good is our contractor right now. It's one that's going.
Speak into the microphone, please. The person who does the minutes, they're not in the meeting with us, so.
Is it on? Okay. All right, I'm Belinda Kingsley, Community Compliance Director. The contractor that we use currently is Looking Good to remove blight. And that's one of the contracts that are going out to bid. So they may or may not continue to be our contractor. But we call them when we have projects that they need to take on to clean up, more large projects. Solid waste is things that are out by the curb, but blight is going to be a bigger project where they're going to go in and do a special project for us. Like Galt Village, they've gone over to clean up piles of things that are dumped there. A couple other projects that we've had recently that
So they were going there and just take all their garbage away. Would they use their own equipment, or is it something that you bring in those big old dumpsters and they just come in there, clean it up?
They generally use their own equipment.
Okay.
The most recent job that they did, they came in, they had 3 big trailers that they tow behind their trucks. They fill them up, and then they take it and pay the tipping fee to have it disposed of.
Is this the same company that we approved not too long ago in the summer for cleanup? Was it grass or something, or
They do.
pick up trash?
Yep.
Was that the same company?
Yes, yep. They have a couple of contracts with the township. Right now, they're operating under an expired contract for ordinance, but they do mowing for us too, ordinance mowing jobs.
Well, thank you. It's not a grand amount of money. I just seen it was $8,500 and it went 10 and leveled up 10.
Yeah,
Not
that's-
a grand amount of money. I just didn't know what it was.
Right, that's a different contract. That's the residential services contract for trash, mostly highway trash that they pick up. And
Explain to
then
me.
they have a contract that they do mowing for the township for vacant properties too. But then we have a separate contract that's ordinance, mowing, and trash pickup, like
Yeah, I
this
see the
blight.
mowing. That's perfect. Thank you.
I just have one.
Yeah.
Linda, a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, we talked in a board meeting about looking back at the ordinance book and maybe changing some of those length of times where we maybe have a problem with noxious weeds or residents cleanup. Any closer on updating that book and changing those timelines?
Well, we're going to have to, it's going to be an update to several codes. So, yeah,
Speak in the microphone, please.
we are looking at that, shortening the time frame, and a lot of it is discretionary. We can set our own time frames. It's not all of them are prescribed by the ordinance. So we can shorten it to whatever we're comfortable with. However, if we think it's going to take them a couple days to do something, we can write that on the placard that goes in the yard for grass. If we think it's something that they can resolve with trash cleanup, within a week, we do that. So it's not always something that's prescribed by the ordinance or code.
Did you get your answer?
I did. And I don't know if this would be for you or for Mike in the back, but since we're talking about mowing and everything, this wouldn't be part of the US 12. That's a different contract to keep that upkeep, Mike?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's 3 separate contracts.
And Belinda, before we take a break, before our 7 o'clock board meeting, can you just update us on some of the enforcement that was requested in West Willow? They want zero tolerance. They've been to the meetings 3 times and asked for speed enforcement and ordinance enforcement.
Okay. Yep.
Do you have any, could you just share the plan that's been going on in ordinance?
Yeah, so we have, we're upping our amount of time that we're spending over there. A couple of different officers are able to devote more time to it. We schedule inspections out, like the rental inspections are scheduled out 30 to 90 days. So when we make a change to a program like this, a request like this, it does take a little bit to phase it in, but 2 of our officers are more available right now, so they're spending at least an hour a day over there each. So at this point, it's 40 hours a month that we're devoting just to West Willow, but also the other 2 officers are going over there when they have spare time. And we had previously divided up the area into quadrants, and everybody got a equal share and they're still patrolling those areas and working, they become more familiar with the area when they patrol the same area. I did look up before we came to the meeting, just what was done like in the last 2 weeks. And we had 36 cases that were opened in the last 2 weeks. And it's issues like parking on the front or back lawn, tall grass or weeds, blight, solid waste. Those are pretty much the most common ones that I saw. And then also in talking to the ordinance officers, they all have said that they are noticing improvements over there. Once they're patrolling and they're getting things cleaned up, and everybody they talk to has somebody they want to report. So it really is improving from what everybody has said. So they don't want to feel like they're nitpicking, and they're trying to hit the biggest things that they can to make the biggest difference. But they are noticing improvements. We are getting some pushback from residents on some of the things because they say, I've been doing this for, 5 years, 6 years. But when we explain the program that we're doing, and I take a lot of calls on this, usually they do understand and they're willing to cooperate. So there really hasn't been a lot of tickets issued necessarily. Most people are willing to bring things into compliance once they know what the ordinance is and it's explained to them. And we do try to make contact with somebody if there is somebody at home when they, come to the property. So that helps. That goes a long ways too if you can explain it to them and show them exactly what needs to be done.
And you notify the landlord as well.
Yeah, if a notice of violation is issued, it does go to the landlord and to the tenant if it's a rental. And we do have a list of which properties are rentals so that we're aware of whether it's a owner-occupied or a rental property, to try to bring the rental properties more into compliance.
And Westville is about 50-50,
Mm-hmm.
rentals and
is.
homeowner. And
Yes.
that's too much concentration of rental, single-family homes.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not that way in 2008, 2009, and the housing foreclosures and crashes, and people scooped them up, and it caused this imbalance. So Habitat's working in there to try to get owner-occupied, and we're trying to change that number. But in the meantime, they have requested that, repeatedly requested to this board and at their neighborhood watch meeting that zero.
And it does
tolerance.
open up a little bit more. I think the date was the 21st of this month, which took like a month to bring into place because of all the inspections everybody was scheduled for. Mm-hmm. So I think it was the 21st of this month is when it opens up and people have more time to devote to being over there. So we'll do in the spring, I'm assuming we'll do our sweep again that we did before, working with Habitat and the Neighborhood Watch.
So thank you for reacting to the residents' requests. We greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, and we do answer anything that comes in as a complaint, whether it's, through our email or, they call us or somebody flags us down. We do respond to any complaints that we receive.
Then we connect them through Lori, the new community resource / social worker. We connect them to the resources that's needed.
So my question is with the budget, with blight, because there's been a request from residents to increase our work in that area, what happens if this isn't budgeted like high enough? They just bring something back for us for a change? Because we've had residents say, we want more done. And so what happens if we do more and then we need more? Because one of the concerns they had is that it takes a long time. If the residents doesn't take care of it, then that's when this idea that blight has to be done by us and then put on the tax roll. So what do we do if we increase what residents are asking us to do? And then there could be an increase of cost.
We would definitely have to bring back a budget amendment to the board. This is, we're trying to base this on, history, but if we do more, of course, it's going to cause an expense, which in turn, we're going to bill back to the resident or the homeowner, and hopefully it's supposed to net to, we're supposed to get all the funds back. It doesn't happen all the time. So, but if it does, we have to have a budget in the expenditure in order to pay for the professionals that have to come in. So we would have to bring something back to you. We haven't had to do it in several years. We haven't had to come with a budget amendment. We've been able to pretty much take care of it, and people, are usually pretty good about taking care of their own thing. There's some big projects that we've been working on. Galt Village is one of them, and we don't really kind of put into this box because it's very big. This is basically just for the normal type of issues that we have. I think they do a real good job of trying to get those funds back in. I think the Treasury Department has been helping with some of the ones that we've had, the older cases, they've been trying to collect for us, and they've been doing an excellent job on that. So the balance is there. I just,
Right, I understand that.
but we would have to bring it back to the board.
I'm looking at 2021, it looks like the activity numbers are higher than what we're budgeting for, so I'm just wondering, should we be recommending, I don't know, 25 or something, just because.
Well, the largest thing that you're looking at in 21 is the 28,000, and that was on the tax roll.
Okay,
So that's what we put on the tax roll. It comes right to us,
Okay.
and that's where you see. So whatever goes on the tax roll, we get back in revenue here. So if they're not paid, so if the noxious weeds are not
Right.
paid, then we get those back in. So that one, we do know with the expense, we get the revenue back because we can put that on the tax roll.
so that 28 is actually money we took in because it came in from the taxes?
Exactly, but it matched an expense for that
Okay.
year as well.
Okay.
All right, we're going to take a break just before the 7 o'clock meeting, if that's okay with you. So the meeting is, work session adjourned at 6:48, 6:50, 6:50, 6:50, 6:50, 6:50, 6:50, 6:50, 6:50,